Okay, I'm just gonna let you know. Let's say, hypothetically speaking, because we're dealing with hypotheticals here. Let's say one of my inspectors calls me up and she says that she understands that through a simulation of legal process involving a completely fraudulent eviction proceeding that is itself being used in order to do a derivative process connected to disposal of chemicals, including chemicals that can be used in the assembly of a chemical weapon. That she understands there's very important 48-hour and timelines, and that on September 6th is not only going to be the anniversary of a filing before the Supreme Court of Texas discussing matters related to actual administration in the state, with an understanding that at that point in time, there was a process of sedition ongoing within the state, and that it was implicated in crimes associated with federal sedition and sedition in the federal system. And that it's also coded to somebody trying to hook up a completely fraudulent contract that they've tried to leverage for all kinds of completely illegal international deals that end up usually involving some sort of liquidation that is fatal and, by the letter of the law, is characterized as an act of terrorism, right? And so something needs to be done. Well, here's the problem. She already did it. Or rather, the Attorney General already did it. How many months ago was that already done? If you had actually responded as you could have responded, and as there was a need to respond at the end of March of 2021, all of this, not only all of this, did you see what they're trying to pass off as law that got passed in the last legislative session here in Texas? If you had responded appropriately, none of that would have been allowed to happen. And by now, where would we be? We'd actually be in a situation where we would have effectively implemented protocols that were already on the books. We would have gone through what has been revealed to be significant and serious unconstitutional violations of the law just here in Texas that have been manipulated for years, including in concert with international incidents of profound importance. We could have already identified that. We could have already found who the intellectual authors were. We could be in a process right now where they were being put through an initiation of an actual formal proceeding to hold them accountable without visiting out some sort of reprisal base on harvesting the bones of people and their families and taking their blood so it can be copyrighted by very high-level biological terrorist networks. We could have already been doing that. That could have already been done. And unfortunately, now again, we're in this situation where there's this alleged eviction threat, which has already been identified with not only specific individuals that have been subjected to protracted religious persecution, but also to entire communities that have been defamed and attempted for extortion into cooperation with serious and significant crime. How many people that believe they're eligible to be considered a hero because of their response as a medical technician or practitioner in the course of COVID-19 are under threat of eviction right now? I have a feeling it's the people they've already microchipped, not because they're covered as a first responder, that are under threat of eviction. Am I correct? So is this part of somebody's reclaiming? Are you attempting to recover losses that you suffered? Why? Because there was a misrepresentation that rather than us actually being under attack, and this being a war taking place internationally, but also on domestic U.S. soil, so we would have had an appropriate response as if it were a war. And then in the course of understanding we were under attack, we would have taken necessary measures to assure that people were safeguarded, as opposed to being put in a position where they could literally be auctioned off as property for individuals in the United States to claim as their largesse, even if they might be in network with people in other countries claiming their share, right? But we didn't do that. And there's been an utter refusal to acknowledge the actual material conditions and implications of what's going on, except there hasn't been. Within 48 hours, we can have a declaration and a moratorium put on any rent collections, period. No collection of rent until further notice. We need the last 3 attorneys general to provide a formal public process wherein they are going to have an audit performed of every bond they've authorized during the time they were attorney general. And until that's done, no rent collection at all in the state of Texas is legal. You've already been informed of an appropriate process whereby, since the beginning of April, this state could already have been prepared financially as well as in other manners to take matters into its own hands to secure its people, rather than engaging in a complete farce of some form of completely defamatory ritual, thinking that somehow what? You were going to be able to use the occult to leverage your own position over and above others? Well, that has not succeeded. This is very simple. It's very practical. Part of the problem you have if you're collecting rents is an understanding that the people who own the property, which may well be you, have to deal with their mortgages. Yesterday, there was a very important period that had very important timelines. You could already have engaged in a process where you went through the formal manners and channels necessary to assure your interests were secured against criminal liability. Because that's what we're talking about now. You do not have the authority, even of the commanders of the Army of the Union of the United States of America during a wartime situation. You don't. None of you do. Until further notice, it is illegal to collect any rent. Any sort of charges need to be assessed, including interest. There will be a process within 48 hours to assure that there is an appropriate bonding, as is already available by law in the state of Texas, commensurate with the profundity of the situation at hand. And as we move forward, we will engage a process, a transparent process, and how to deal with that appropriately. This is an emergency matter, which is understood to be an emergency matter, which requires immediate action. In the course of that, if you have a problem with the implications of this situation, you can talk to me directly. If you do not talk to me directly, you will not be acknowledged, and your claim will not be acknowledged. This has gone on long enough. There's a lot we have to deal with. I know all of you are more than ready to. You've had plenty of time to prepare. There's been literally now over 5 years where you guys have been in concert with each other, organizing to be available to respond appropriately just at this point in time. This is exactly what you did this for, right? Of course it is. You wouldn't have been able to consolidate so much resources and so much power if you were not absolutely qualified to be ready at this moment. And that means you understand. It's not about tightening your belt. It's not about a sacrifice. And you're not making a donation. That's not what this is. This is about attending to your duty and understanding there are criminal implications. It behooves you now to establish yourself as in repudiation to this crime spree, and you can start with something very simple by publicly acknowledging that you are not going to be charging or collecting rents in the state of Texas until further notice.